And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud sponsor of the SARA Rail Conference 2025. Powering progress, connecting economies. Good evening, welcome to the program. 8 minutes after 6, I'm Stephen Grootes. Plenty to come, been a busy day on the Stock Exchange News Service today. Several big companies and institutions and SOEs and call them what you will, all delivering or sending, publishing results and updates. Just one of those Mondays. Sasol probably the biggest of the bunch, and we'll speak to their CEO, Simon Baloyi, in just a moment. I was fascinated by ADvTECH's results because they seem to be growing the number of learners at their schools in South Africa, while Curro seems to be going in the other way. And I'm not sure why that is. What exactly is going on there? Geoff Whyte, the CEO at ADvTECH, he'll be on your radio in a little while. Meryl Pick will be taking you through some of the market movements. And Mpumi Mpofu, the CEO at Airports Company South Africa. Plenty to say, I think, about their results. Blockbuster results, to be fair. 1.1 billion rands worth of profit coming from Airports Company South Africa. And we'll talk a little bit about tax towards the end of the hour as well. And taxing cryptocurrencies and SARS. Looking at that, I was very interested in some of the numbers. I don't know what your experience of going through our airports has been recently. And unless you go through Lanseria or one or two of the others, you're probably almost certainly going through an airport which is controlled, owned, run by Airports Company South Africa, technically part of government. And my own personal view is that things are fine, but I kind of wonder in 2 years' time, does it need a bit of maintenance, a bit of work now? And Mpumi Mpofu, the CEO at AXA, just making the point they're going to spend 20 billion rand on airports over the next 5 years. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. I do wonder where it's going. And when I look at how their revenue is up, and if you've been listening to me long enough, you'll know that paying for parking I find particularly aggravating. And I will be sure to throw in a question like that. I was astounded to see that 49% of AXA's income does not come from aeronautical matters. It doesn't come from landing, managing, and helping planes take off. It comes from other things. It comes from parking fees and from rent. So your experience, please, of our airports, and if you had 20 billion rand to spend, which airport would you spend it on, and what would it be for? Would it just be to subsidize, I don't know, free parking at OR Tambo, which is probably where I would put it. I know for some people in the business, they'll talk about air bridges, the bridge that connects your plane to the airport so you can get out quickly, making that work. There are other things, of course. But where would you spend your money if you had 20 billion rand and you had to spend it at South African airports? What would you do with it? Good to hear from you tonight on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, strong results from Sasol, swinging back into profit in the last financial year to the end of June. Its headline earnings doubling to 22 billion rand. Some of that is non-recurring items. There's a settlement with Transnet. There's a big reduction in provisions for environmental rehabilitation. The company's turnover down 9%. Its EBITDA down 14%. The president and CEO at Sasol is Simon Baloyi. Simon, good evening. Welcome back to The Money Show, and thank you for your time. I suppose it's kind of in the nature of the businesses that you're in that lower oil prices in particular will have a big impact on you. There's still problems at Secunda and Sasolburg. All in all, it's been a little bit of a rough ride, often through things not of your making.
Evening, Stephen, and evening to your listeners. Yes, I mean we did face macroeconomic conditions this year. You've already mentioned the Rand oil price and the refining margins. There was some volume challenges as well that we encountered. However, despite that, Team Sasol delivered a strong set of results. In terms of focusing on what we can control. So we made sure, in terms of the free cash flow, notwithstanding the Transnet settlement, even if you normalize for that, our free cash flow is actually up 30% without the Transnet settlement. And with that, it takes us to 75%. So it was good overall focus from the team in terms of the cash fixed cost as well, where we were just below 70 billion rands, which means 1% up year on year and beating inflation. So I mean, we're pleased with the results.
You've been through a process of resetting your international chemicals division, and that's quite a tricky time. How different do you expect that division to look over the next few years? What are you going to be doing?
In the international chemical space, you're correct. We're busy with a reset. You remember in FY24, our EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA from that business was $288 million, and we did give a target that by FY28 we want to be at between $750 to $850 million. We did guide that by the end of this year we wanted to see an uplift between 100 and 200, and we ended up $120 million. I mean, in line with our guidance. And the key focus areas there's three key levers that we're using is the market focus. So we focus on the markets and the markets that we serve. Then asset optimization. I did previously speak about asset optimization as a tool where we're mothballing or closing non-value adding assets. And finally, cost discipline. So extreme cost discipline to make sure that, I mean, both our cost in terms of our input cost and operating cost is under control. So those three key levers are helping us. If you look at the uplift in terms of value, I'll say 70% is self-help measures. And then we did get some, market tailwinds in terms of ethylene and the price of palm kernel oil, which affects the overall pricing of surfactants. But 70% was our own focus.
You focused actually, you say you try to keep costs, you spend a lot of focus on keeping costs down across the group. You kept them below inflation, which is quite low at the moment. I would imagine it's quite tough to get any more value out of that. I mean, are you kind of at the end of what you can cut?
We're not at the end. I mean, we will continue. You remember as we guided through, Capital Markets Day, that in the next 3 years, across the whole group, we want to take out between 10 to 15, billion rands, in our cost base. So we will do that, which means we have to run ahead of inflation. So the continual focus on commercial and supply chain excellence, that is going to continue. We're going to be at least ruthless in our focus on making sure that whether is the cost that we pay to our suppliers, that it is fair and it's a win-win situation for both us and the suppliers.
Your share price is up over 25% over the last 6 months and was up, I think, almost just over 11% today, Simon. There is still quite a lot of ground to make up if you look at sort of what's happened over the last 12 months. Do you think investors are sold on your vision of the Sasol of the future? Do you think, you had a Capital Markets Day, very well received. You've had today's results. Do you think investors are sold, are buying what you're selling in terms of the vision?
Yes, during Capital Markets Day, we clearly, demonstrated, when we unveil our strategy, that we understand, the challenges that the group faces. We have clear plans to address those challenges. We did give both medium and long-term targets, and we've also shown how to measure those targets every year. So we've translated those targets into clear priorities. I did commit at Capital Markets Day to give regular feedback on how we are tracking, and today was one of those proof points where we're showing that we're not where we need to be, because we did indicate that it's a journey, but we are on track with what we promised.
There are many different changes that you're navigating at the moment in lots of different directions. Do you think the Sasol of the 2030s is going to employ the same number of people as it does now, or do you think that your workforce is going to come down significantly?
As the group grows, like any other person, as the group grows, you have to, make sure that your input costs are under strict control. So what we're going to do, post 2030, we have to make sure as we take advantages of technology, we take advantages of the changing landscape. As we grow into, if you look at the energy transition as that unfolds, we then have to make sure that we've got, we've got the optimum number of people and technologies that we need to perform our activities. So I'll say, we've demonstrated over the last 2 years that we've kept, our total labor force, under check. If you look at the results, you'll see that almost year on year, for 2 years in a row, we've kept our labor the same or slightly decreased. So we will have to, make sure that we keep, our labor cost under control as well.
Simon Baloyi, thank you so much. President and CEO at Sasol. 18 minutes now after 6.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
The education company ADvTECH reporting its revenue up by 10% for the 6 months to the end of June, driven mainly by its education division. It's growing very nicely across the rest of Africa. Its South African division growing too. Its operating profit was up 14%, but not quite as strongly as the rest of our continent. Geoff Whyte is the CEO at ADvTECH. Geoff, good evening. There's been, and I'm sure you've seen this, there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of weeks about the declining purchasing power of the middle classes. What's happening with your schools in South Africa? You actually describe your enrolment figures. The word you used was robust.
Yes. Now, listen, I think there's no doubt that the South African economy is under pressure and parents are feeling the strain economically. I think from our point of view, we've been making investments into people, systems and facilities to deliver superior experiences and academic outcomes to our students. We think that's what's driving our enrolment growth, and that provides us with a great base for the financial performance that we announced today.
You refer to a focus on collection processes. Are some people battling to pay their fees? Do you have to spend a little bit more time getting your money, collecting?
Actually, that's a reference to centralizing of debtor management, and we're trying to make the process smoother and a better experience for parents, and the progress that we made there, I think, is driving that improved performance on the debtors book.
Okay. Do you think there's still then, you talk glowingly about your product, of course, but do you think there's still room for growth in the sort of independent school sector in South Africa, despite the economy you describe?
Yeah, we're still seeing population growth. So I think you have the tailwind of population growth and the headwind of economic growth. Overall, our South African schools enrollments were up 4% year on year, which is quite a strong number off a big base. So we think there's still potential for growth, but you've got those two competing forces.
Are some of the people, maybe some of the learners, is it their first time in an independent school, or are they coming to you from other providers who reported last week that their enrollments are down slightly?
I think if you look at the published data, then we're definitely growing market share, and that has to be coming from somewhere.
Okay, Geoff, you're very polite. There's a lot of growth happening in the rest of Africa, obviously. Your enrollment there was up much, much more strongly. Clearly a lot of investment there, and from what I can see, it must be doing quite nicely.
Yes, I think the underlying organic growth was strong in Africa, but we also benefited from the acquisition of the Flipper Schools Group in Ethiopia, which supported the numbers. But we've seen a very positive start to that ownership of the Flipper Schools Group. Since we acquired it in November of last year, enrollments have already grown by 5%. So that bodes well for the future. And Makini in Kenya doing very well. Crawford International in Kenya doing very well. The Gaborone International School is almost at capacity. So across our African schools, we're seeing strong demand for well-regarded brands, and our biggest challenge there is adding capacity to meet the demand for further enrollments.
Do you think you're going to see, clearly there's more room for growth in those markets than in our markets, and I imagine that's where you're going to be looking to for growth to an extent?
Yeah, I think you've got higher GDP growth in the markets that we're in South Africa, which is a fairly low bar, as we all know. And you've also got strong population growth. And I think typically a less developed education sector. So I think for us with strong brands and to be able to support various functions from South Africa, that makes those African markets very attractive.
You've finished your relocation of the Rosebank College in Cape Town, but I'm very interested in your new property in Grayston Drive in Sandton. What kind of vision do you have for that? You call it as sort of, it's going to have 9,000 people on that campus. What are we going to be looking at, Geoff?
Well, we're relocating our Vega, Bordeaux and Varsity College Sandton campuses to the new site in Grayston. We're building actually a magnificent new university campus there, which will have world-class teaching and learning and recreational facilities. So work is happening furiously on that site, but I can't wait for the world to see it. It really is a beautiful project. It will double our current capacity in those two institutions in their current locations from 4,500 to 9,000. But the ultimate capacity on that site is probably 12 or 13,000. So we've also got lots of headroom for future growth.
I mean, the real test of tertiary education now is, will it get my kid a job, right? And I think that's what parents of teenage children go to bed at night thinking, what's going to happen to them after school, because that getting into a job is so tight. Does that mean you have to pay a bit more attention to what you're actually teaching? And Geoff, feel free to use the words AI if you need to.
Listen, I think two things are critical. I think students want to know that they're going to be supported to finish their degree in the time it's supposed to take. It's not going to take multiple years more. And they need to get a job at the end of it. And we're very focused on offering degrees that are linked to job market demands. But we also invest heavily in industry links to help students build those very important connections. And a significant time and effort goes into career services to help place students at the end of their degree. And we believe that our placement record is actually significantly better than the public sector, and that's a stat that we're very proud of.
I mean, if you look at population growth, the pressure just to get into universities, the difficulties that we see in our society, I mean, the scope for growth for a group like yours must be vast.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you've got that demographic tailwind I touched on before. In the tertiary sector, you've also got a significant impact of that imbalance of supply and demand in university places in the public sector. So, if we're in a position where we can grow market share, which we believe we're doing in a growing market driven by demographics and that imbalance of supply and demand, that's a very exciting place for us to be.
Geoff Whyte, thanks very much indeed. The CEO at ADvTECH, you with the Money Show, 25 minutes after 6. Your thoughts on what you want your young teenager, or your older teenager, your teenager, to actually study. What's going to get them a job after school would be my question. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Meryl Pecker's portfolio manager at Old Mutual Investments. Meryl, good evening. Let's just pick up on ADvTECH very quickly. I mean, quite a strong update if you look at what Geoff Whyte was saying there.
Absolutely. Good evening, and good evening to your listeners. I think interestingly, though, to look at the growth in rest of Africa versus South Africa, you can see that at the moment, 16% earnings growth is quite something in this market, but a lot of that growth is coming outside of South Africa at this point, and the SA market becoming more competitive. But, I think if you look at ADvTECH for some time, their story was we've invested in schools, we need to move along the J-curve as we fill those schools, and they have delivered on that. The return on equity has increased in line with that, sweating that asset base more. The 16 historic price to earnings ratio, it's not cheap, but it has delivered quite solid earnings growth and improving returns for the last few years.
It does seem to be onto something. Sasol, you would have heard Simon Baloyi earlier. Do you think investors have bought the vision of the kind of new Sasol? Certainly that share price up very strongly today.
It is up today quite strongly. I think you need to zoom out to see how low the base is for Sasol.
Yeah.
So I think a year ago the market was pricing in a rights offer, a balance sheet on a knife's edge once again. But if we look at 2019 and before, the kind of Sasol price versus the Brent oil price, that relationship has still got quite a long way to recover to historic norms. And I think systematically the company is starting to address the reasons that could have caused that decoupling. Number one, the balance sheet, the free cash flow, even if you take the Transnet one source windfall out, free cash flow was still up 15% roughly in a year where the Rand oil price was actually down. So they did very well to keep costs going backwards actually in real terms. They cut their costs. tight working capital management, and cost control at these and difficult decisions about mothballing cash burning and loss-making assets offshore. So from 2019, things started to decouple because of more scrutiny on climate change and how they would need to invest to address that. I think the capital markets there, they've given the market certainty that, or clarity that they're not going to invest unless there's a return, and they're going to be more pragmatic. They've taken action on some of this loss-making stuff in the US, and then the balance sheet. I think if they can get back to a position where they actually are paying dividends again, you could see more out of Sasol, but they need to keep now delivering on the cost cutting, on capital capex spend discipline. So I think the market is starting to pay attention again. It's been vastly unloved, so there could be more.
ADvTECH kind of really telling us something, I think, where, their profits weren't really up by much at all. And in fact, their earnings weren't very strong, but they're still paying back a cash dividend. They're cash rich, but they're deciding, this seems to me to be a deliberate decision and possibly for shareholders a responsible one. They've decided not to invest in the economy.
Yeah, reading through the statement, it really is the definition of a management team that is excelling at controlling what is in their control. Costs have gone backwards, not in real terms, in nominal terms. They've actually cut absolute costs. The working capital management was very well controlled, and hence this cash generation continues. But they speak of that overcapacity in manufacturing, the imports without any protection, where neighboring countries are putting on protection. So basically they're saying the policy environment is not encouraging them to invest, be it energy costs, be it kind of tariff and duty structures, or municipal management and costs. And it's difficult to argue with that.
Sure. Yeah, no, it is. Meryl Peck, thank you so much. Portfolio manager at the Old Mutual Investment Group. You're with The Money Show, just gone 7:30.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
12 minutes to 7 the time. Well, big profits for airports company South Africa. Their highest profits ever. They made 1.1 billion rand for the financial year to the end of March. They're also planning a huge amount of spending over the next 5 years. And when I say a huge amount, I mean 21 billion rand. Mpumi Mpofu is on the line for you. She is the CEO at AXA. Mpumi, good evening. Just a moment ago, I asked people for their thoughts, their experiences of going through some of the airports. Let's listen to those quickly.
Hey, this is John from Randburg. I'm so glad you're talking about this issue of the airports. I've been through OR Tambo International Airport a couple of times recently, and I have to say, it's a horrible experience arriving in South Africa. I can't imagine what it must be like for tourists coming in and being faced with grumpy staff, often is the case. Often the immigration has a long queue manned by very few people. Then you get through security control and somebody wants you to give them a tip for cleaning the bathroom when actually the whole bathroom stinks of urine. And then going through customs this last time, there was a massive delay. Nobody explaining why there should be a delay through the green customs line. Managing all of this and creating a great experience for tourists, for business people, for people coming back home from holidays, etc., should be a top priority for us and where I would spend the money.
Hi, Stephen. It's Anonymous here in Midrand. The airports look very dirty, especially OR Tambo International. It looks dirty. It looks worn out. It is in need of a serious revamp. It's actually an embarrassment walking through the international side of the airport and seeing all of that. It just gives an impression that all is not good and well in terms of AXA managing the airport. It needs significant improvement.
All right, well, listening to your voice notes this evening, Mpumi Mpofu, the CEO at AXA. Mpumi, good evening. You do mention operational headwinds in your results today, and I imagine that's sort of what you were talking about. There are one or two difficulties.
Yes, no, absolutely, Stephen, and thank you very much. As we sit celebrating the achievement of the 1.1 billion, and the first time we're paying dividends, or the second time we're paying dividends to our shareholders of 310 million, we reflect on the operational challenges and the headwinds that we face. And part of that has been a deteriorating asset base and infrastructure, to which we've committed 21 billion, for 70% of which is going to be spent on the rehabilitation and refurbishment that will address exactly some of the issues that are raised. And those issues are the issues that are within the control of AXA, the condition of the building, lightening it up, etc. But we normally say, Stephen, we run a very complex business and a complex environment. The parts of OR Tambo particularly that are not so bright, dark and dingy are actually the old Jan Smuts. Now, I can't remember, I don't know how many people remember what Jan Smuts Airport was like then, because what's happened in the airport expansion is literally we've expanded from one part of the airport to the other, developing newer elements. And that's what happens when you do what's called a brownfield development. You increasingly are dealing with old parts of an airport starting to deteriorate, infrastructure getting worn out, even problems, operational problems emerging in those. And then you're expanding to the newer parts, which basically can sustain higher traffic, faster passenger, efficient processing, etc. So the dedication we've made of the 70% of the 21 billion to that rehabilitation is really intended for those old parts of OR Tambo that basically will be brought up to modern, high-tech, and similar to the other parts, but also similar to global practices. Let me also indicate, in terms of what the two callers have indicated, there are certain parts that are operated by AXA. So AXA is a company that's responsible for airport operations generally, but were legislated to run the airport, but were not legislated to do other parts that for which legislation exists in other areas. So immigration is a Department of Home Affairs function. We know that they established a new organization called Border Management Authority, and Border Management Authority has been challenged with low budgets until, I don't know, maybe next year they'll look better, and they're still struggling with budgets to facilitate the deployment of more people on arrival. You see, there's an initiative in Cape Town where even the cities are assisting with deploying immigration officers in order to alleviate the problem, and we hope that's going to expand by the Department of Home Affairs to OR Tambo, because that's where the biggest numbers are, in effect. And hopefully that will then deal with the immigration problem. The others relate to customs as well. Customs is a functionary of SARS, and the operations there is a legislated portion that is the responsibility of SARS. Our role as AXA is to run the joint coordination arrangements with all of these multiple stakeholders. We call ourselves a functional ecosystem of multiple stakeholders that all play their legislative or even business responsibilities on our platform. And that coordination is actually quite critical to get all the parties working together, delivering the on-time performance that you see when an aircraft departs on time, and the happiness and passenger facilitation. That means people are not waiting on queues. However, the downside is that when those individual organizations are facing problems, we are very often not able to intervene as AXA to solve those problems, such as the staffing of the immigration desks. Because it's a legislated function of BMA and Department of Home Affairs, it remains that, and they must find the solution. We can coerce. In fact, that's what we do around the queuing. We help, we manage the queue, we've diverted the queues, made sure non-visa people go fast on the one lane and others go slower because the process, etc. We produce interventions that try and ease the challenge. But if the challenge is primarily a staffing issue at a newly established BMA, then those challenges, we hope, are going to start disappearing. From the infrastructure perspective, we are making commitments to totally eradicate the challenges that are related to the asset base, and that means the people movers, the lifts, the escalators, the technology, the scanners, the security machines, all of that is up for renewal and will basically enable us to bring back a very perfect passenger experience through our airport. We're also going to deploy higher technology, biometrics and facial recognition and other things that will just aid the process so that we can be similar to world-class airports that we normally compete with.
So, and for me, I'm sure you've been talking all day, by the way. So you
Excuse my voice.
Not at all. I know the feeling. Look, I fully accept quite a few things are out of your control. Some of them are in your control. I mean, one of them is travelators that carry people. The other one would be toilets, for example. I mean, stuff like that. I realize, if you go to an airport almost anywhere in the world late on a Friday night, you'll have a very different experience than if you go at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. I do wonder, though, if things are kind of just as clean and as quick and as slick, these are the things you control now that I'm talking about, as they sort of used to be.
Yes, no, the ones that we do control, Stephen, as I indicated, we've made the commitment. Part of it is also about the efficiency management of the airport. So just let's start on the infrastructure side. So the toilets are up for renewal, all of them at OR Tambo, but they don't get renewed all at the same time. Because when we do that, we must shut it down and then open the others. And we know what our passenger throughput is, and we don't necessarily, at the pace at which we move, may not be too pleasing to passengers because we've got to keep some open. But you'll see brand new toilets, modern design, nice, brilliant facilities that will come with this investment of this 21 billion. The other is about the management of staff, which invariably includes efficiency of the contract management, because we have contract companies that are cleaning, and penalties for those who underperform, so that in fact when they do, if cleaners are not in the cleaning positions on time, doing what they need to be doing, then we take disciplinary action against them, Stephen. We act against people who come to OR Tambo thinking they just come to roam around in a city and find economic opportunities rather than executing the duties that they are there to actually do on behalf of the company, but also in terms of providing improved passenger service for our customers. So there's a lot of discipline and a lot of work that is done around those that don't perform as they should. Contracts are terminated, the conditions of contracts are reviewed, the penalties are paid for companies that don't deliver as they should. But as we move to the future, we really are committed. We've got an efficiency factor that we measure against, and we're committed to achieving that.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but we are going to run out of time, and I do want to put something else to you. One of the other things you can't control is air traffic navigation services. That's a separate entity of the Department of Transport. They've had some problems. In fact, some of your airports weren't able to take flights for safety reasons because of those issues. That must be very frustrating for you. The ministers sort of intervened. Do you expect that process, that situation to be resolved? And it's quite a difficult problem to resolve.
Well, our understanding is that a lot of that is now behind us, with the issues that have been resolved around making sure that the procedures that were outstanding are updated, approved by SACA, and that it is unnecessary for some of the airports now to still be operating without them. So a lot of progress has been made. We understand a lot of the procedures are now approved, and that will see us. The second rollout is although on infrastructure that would also support the ATNS operations, and all of that is also being rolled out to make sure that it basically is operating efficiently. It normally affects us in bad weather because, in a sense, if the procedure is not clear, the airlines can't take the risk of landing in a particular airport if either the instrumentation or the procedure is unclear. Effectively, they abort the trip and they divert to a different place. What we've been able to do, though, as AXA, is to assist them. So in cases, for instance, where Joburg to East London flight, East London is a very problematic one in terms of the weather and its location, we then divert them, say, to Chief David Stearman in PE, and we as AXA facilitate and pay for their busing up back to East London. So we've been also very helpful in the process. We've not just stood by and watched ATNS struggle through some of these things. We've assisted passengers, we've put out money, and we've ensured that the journey is actually pleasant. We've also spoken to the airlines about alternative routes and basically managed the situation jointly with them in as much as we could. But yes, we see improvement in that area as well.
Mpumi and Paul, I do have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. I do appreciate the time. The CEO at Airports Company South Africa.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud sponsor of the SARA Rail Conference 2025. Powering progress, connecting economies. Good evening. Plenty to come in the next little while. We'll talk to Mark Waxberger, the CEO at Capital Hotels and Apartments. Been watching that little fracas, debate, dispute, argument. I don't know, is it a fight yet between Patricia de Lille, the tourism minister, and the board of SA Tourism, which she dissolved? She did hit back today, finally. Bronwyn Williams has been looking at a book about your digital identity. It's a book called The Future of You. And in fact, it's quite a strange thing. How do people know who you are? What in an age where you don't really meet people? How would you know who somebody is? How would you even know if they're alive? It's science fiction-y, but it's kind of happening. And then I'm really excited to confirm to you that we'll be speaking to Nduduzo Makhathini, the pianist, the composer, the music academic. He'll be with you from 7:30. Really looking forward to that conversation this evening.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
011 8830702 and 0214460567. We heard your experiences of our airports a few moments ago. We heard the response from Mpumi Mpofu, the CEO at Airports Company SA. And yes, they did announce record profits today. So they do deserve a pat on the back for that. But the experience of airports. Let's very quickly hear from sort of the airline perspective. Lyndon Burns is the managing director at Plane Talking. Lyndon, good evening. Thanks for getting in touch. What do you make of the state of our airports when AXA is announcing, and well done to them, record profits?
Hi, Stephen, and to everyone listening tonight. Yeah, look, no one begrudges a well-run business turning a profit. And I think as taxpayers, it sounds great. We don't have another insatiable albatross around our neck, but that's the picture they want to paint, I think. It's not necessarily the one we're seeing, and I think your listeners have pointed out, these buildings have seen better times, and even as the airlines will point out, and before I came on air, I checked today's NOTAMs, by the way. These are the notices published to pilots, notices to airmen. And there's a long shopping list of items that have remained unserviceable at our airports for months. Runway lighting, taxiway lighting, airfield navigation signage that's not serviceable at the three main airports. Things like that. The contact air bridges, not all of them have been returned to service since COVID. That's 5 years ago now. Okay, we've got airports like Kimberley where you still can't land or take off in the dark because AXA haven't yet re-employed all the firemen and don't run a fire and rescue service after dark. So business travellers who want to travel to and from the Diamond City at more convenient times can't do that. And where is this handsome profit coming from? 51% of their revenue comes from aeronautical charges. These are statutory charges that it commands for aircraft landing, parking, and passenger service fees. But it's doubled its profit. And under the International Civil Aviation Organization principles for airport charges, you're only meant to charge for services you provide. So where's the money going to? And this dividend, what's happening to it? It's not being ring-fenced for reinvestment in aviation. It's actually going to the central fiscus. So really, it's a statutory charge that's, or a tax that's masquerading as a statutory user charge. So there are lots of questions that really need to be answered. And I think, a lot of people in the industry are going to look at this and go, hang on, you plead poverty every time you come up for a tariff review. You just did a 17.5% tariff increase last year and a similar amount the year before. We've not seen any sod turning on all of these massive capex projects you're talking about and that you've announced. And we're still bedeviled by things like broken fuel pumps. And by the way, the ATNS thing, thank you for asking Mpumi about that. She clearly hasn't read the NOTAMs because there are still hundreds of those procedures that remain suspended. And they affect all of our airports, and they affect AXA's ability to maintain the schedule that airlines operate to.
Lyndon Burns, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Very comprehensive list of issues there. The Managing Director at Plain Talking. There's a lot going on. And look, I'll be the first to admit, as Mpumi and Mpofu said, that it's a complex business and a lot of things she can't control. But there are things that AXA can control. So I found that very interesting. Lyndon Burns, thanks very much indeed. Your views tonight on 011 8830702 and 021 446 0567.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, finally, quite a strong response from the Tourism Minister Patricia de Lille today to accusations she's protecting the suspended CEO of Tourism SA, Nduduzo Makhathini. Last week, you may recall, several members of the board of SA Tourism, of the former board, said she had dissolved them after they suspended Makhathini after the Auditor General had made findings about her conduct. Now, de Lille today denying defending Makhathini, says the board had long-running procedural flaws when convening meetings, saying she won't allow the law to be undermined. Well, Mark Waxberger is the CEO at Capital Hotels and Apartments, someone I think you can safely assume has a great interest in tourists coming to South Africa. Mark, good evening. I mean, from your vantage point, right in the sort of middle of the industry, how worried are you about what's going on here? I mean, do you know what is going on here?
Thanks for having me on the show. Look, to be honest with you, we're not worried. And why we're not worried is that we're used to this, unfortunately, is what I can say. You know, it's been years and years of the tourism industry leadership being kind of up and down and left and right. And yet we are so resilient, and yet we're performing very well. So it's one of those things where imagine if they got it right. It could be absolutely amazing. It could lead to development of amazing things. But as it stands right now, it's kind of priced in, if you will, the fact that it is always going to be a bit topsy-turvy.
I mean, do you think, I don't know if you take a stand on which side you support. Do you think the minister's actions are harming tourism here?
I don't have enough information. I did see the release from SATSA today, which, as a body that really supported Patricia de Lille, as I did, they've taken a stance now with, I'm sure, more information than I can have, which is that the minister is wrong in all of this. But I don't know myself. It's very difficult to know. But it was quite interesting to hear how they're reporting now, and we are hearing murmurs in the industry about our conferences are not being attended internationally. And so that actually does have an implication. As an example, the golf conference that was happening internationally now, we don't have representation from South Africa, but yet it's a very competitive market. And, these golfers then end up going to other countries that are competing. So, what's going on, I'm not sure, but the implications on the ground are definitely there. Are they massive and material? I don't know if it's absolutely catastrophic at this point.
There are other things, unfortunately, working against tourism at the moment, and we've seen so much commentary about the decline of services, and let me be blunt here, in places outside the Western Cape, Mark. I just wonder, and I completely understand it, I suffer from the decline of those services too. That does make it a lot harder to sell South Africa as a tourism destination. It's quite hard to say, come to South Africa, when everyone's grumbling about South Africa.
No question about it. And that's why no material number of new hotels have been built since the 2010 World Cup, when things were going swimmingly. Infrastructure was strong, and we had obviously the boom to the 2010 World Cup. And since then, fast forward over 15 years, and we as the Capital Hotels have built something like 25% of all new hotel development. And the reason why we've done it is because we put in our own infrastructure, and we try not to rely on the infrastructure that is provided, because it just is unreliable.
Are there, if you were given a magic wand and were told, okay, fix tourism, what would you do first?
Well, the issue has always stemmed first and foremost with the visa issues, which the Home Affairs Office seems to be making great progress on. That was probably the single biggest issue. But then beyond that, you see companies that rely very much on these big events. We're talking about, like you'll see in Vegas as an example, the sellout of a Vegas convention, and then all of a sudden all the hotels are full. That's generally how the hotel industry has been built worldwide. In South Africa, we rely much more on killing our own fish, or I don't know if that's the right word to use, but we don't rely on the industry per se in so many ways. Whereas if the industry did perform and win some of those huge conferences, then we would all absolutely benefit, and it would be our pricing would then adjust, and obviously that would lead downstream to the GDP multiplier effect, which the industry has, on labor and on spending power. So right now rates are almost, you might say, quite low because of the lack of that tourism performance. And like I said to you, imagine it came right. It would be absolutely astonishingly wonderful, because it's the most wonderful country with the most wonderful people.
Well, I remember so clearly Tito Mboweni, finance minister as he then was, and publishing a very important economic document to grow the economy. And the two things he said that we could do very well were tourism and agriculture. And in both cases, what's important about them is that people who've sort of been betrayed by our education system can work in those sectors. You don't need to bring cheaper manufacturing jobs here, for example. There are lots of things you can do. And unfortunately, despite promises, and at one point, I think, optimism in your industry, we still just don't see it.
Yes. The effect is unbelievable in terms of job creation in tourism and agriculture, as you say. And it is a pity that there aren't many, many more hospitality institutions under construction. Like I say, we as the capital, we're kind of making our own plan and building anyway, like we're building in Quebec at the moment, in Port Elizabeth.
Mark Waxberger, thanks so much. CEO at Capital Hotels and Apartments.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
I saw over the weekend Bani Patiana stepping down as chair of the National Lotteries Commission. I don't quite know yet why he's decided to do that. He's been there, I think, 3 years now. He has 2 years left sort of in his term. I remember listening to him on Bongani Bingwa's show on 702 a couple of months ago, and he was talking about trying to reform the National Lotteries Commission. And as we all know, this was a commission that just became hopelessly corrupt, really is the only words that describe it. And we've seen the SIU investigate. We've seen Raymond Joseph's astonishingly impressive journalism for Ground Up, with story after story about it. I know Bani Patiana is of a certain age. I think he's 80 now, or nearly. But I was still just sad to see him go. And I was reminded, and we see this in institutions everywhere, of the huge fight back against his efforts to try and clean it up, and how difficult the job actually is. And what I hope is not the case. I'm hoping he didn't just throw in the towel because he'd had enough and decided it couldn't be done. I mean, I hope that's not why. I mean, he's someone who's played an immense role in our society over many, many years and would sort of deserve better. But I'm sometimes astonished by the fight back that we see when people come in and try and clean things up. And I can't help but wonder if the National Lotteries Commission is an example of that kind of fight back. If you've maybe got some insight into that, good to hear from you on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show.
Business Books.
So this may be a strange question. How do you know who you are, and how do you prove who you are? I can see Tsegofatso and Takiso in front of me. They both know me. When they see me, they know that I am Stephen Grootes. I know they're Tsegofatso and Takiso. But it may not be that simple going forward, because our relationships may all be entirely virtual. Bronwyn Williams is the trend translator and future finance specialist at Flux Trends. Bronwyn, good evening. You've been looking at the book, The Future of You. Can your identity survive 21st century technology? And the implications are actually quite frightening.
Yes, absolutely. So this is a marvelous book. It's written by one of my favorite futurists, Tracy Follows. She initially studied philosophy, then worked in advertising, and is now a business strategist and consultant and futurist to many organizations that will be household names. So she's been around the block for a while. She actually wrote this book towards the last crazy days of our COVID sort of blip in society. So it's a couple of years old now. But I thought I'd bring it to your attention, especially since we haven't covered it on the show, because so much of what she was talking about just a couple of short years ago that was deemed to be quite out there and outlandish just, in 2022, is now very much questions that we're grappling with as businesses, as societies, as individuals at the moment. Basically, the advent of all things AI have really proved a lot of the issues that Tracy was talking about back then to be things we really do need to be paying attention to. You raised one of them, of course, this ability to identify whether someone is a dog, a cat, a terrorist, or who they say they are on the other end of the screen. Whether you've got kids who are playing on Roblox, for example, you might be interested to know who those avatars are that you're talking about interacting with. If you're a company, of course, you want to know that you're interacting with suppliers and customers who are real people who are actually going to pay you or deliver the goods that you've actually purchased, right? So this whole issue of verifiable identity is one of the things Tracy talks about, and of course the sort of security issues that come from not being able to verify that. But she also dives a bit into the sort of philosophy of who we actually are, which is also interesting from a brand perspective, because a lot of what Tracy was speaking about there is around how our identities are becoming fragmented. Even in our own heads, we have these different compartments as to what we say online versus what we say on this platform or that platform. And a lot of that's to do with reputational kind of engineering or hedging your reputational bets, as I like to say, like you do with your financial investments, because staking your reputation on a platform that could deplatform you or in a community that could cancel you are risks. So we're spreading ourselves and how we present ourselves based on our perception of how that will land and what that will do to our social credit and those sorts of things, which means if you're a brand or a business, you don't necessarily know that the metadata of the people that you're targeting, as much as we have access to all of everybody's information at the moment, is really who that person is, or if it's just a sort of constructed version of themselves that your customer is giving to you, which leads to all sorts of implications on wasted advertising budgets in a more prosaic sense, and fundamental existential crises on a more philosophical end of the scale.
I mean, there's so much to it. So, one of the examples would be a sort of virtual legacy. So, I remember reading science fiction, I think Peter F. Hamilton, written not that long ago, by the way, the late 90s, of, a character who sort of existed after they died. Now, I can just imagine the arguments we're going to have about this person's rights. Can they still trade on the stock market? Can they do this? Can they do that? Can they clone their brain? It goes on and on and on. And frankly, I enjoyed it as fiction. I'm not ready for it as fact.
And yet here it is. As Tracy, I think she tweeted, because she still uses that platform for, what do we call it, X these days, about the case in the UK or the US at the moment, where just a couple of weeks ago, one of the victims of a school shooting was called up to do an interview with the journalist. His parents basically gave permission to use his online legacy to act and bear witness to the crime that he was a victim of, which is, again, a huge amount of an ethical can of worms as to how our legal systems are going to work. Can the dead bear witness at their own trials, for example? We've also had cases of deceased victims showing up in court, right? And their AI history, a version of themselves, an unconscious consciousness is now being used to manipulate the very legal system that us as individuals and corporates are going to have to navigate, which is a huge ethical minefield because, of course, is that AI footprint sort of regurgitated from your past social media and blog history really a representation of what you really think, or is it, as I just said, a slice of yourself that you are willing to share to the public, which is not what you really thought about? And, of course, the digital copyrights of what you leave behind and who gets access to your digital legacy and who gets to profit off it, are all sorts of things that Tracy spoke about too. There are plenty of movies, where you wake up and nobody recognizes you, right? And you try to sort of prove, or you can't find your family or whatever it is. And that seems so incredibly far-fetched, can't ever have happened, etc. But in a virtual era, it absolutely can, because someone could wipe away all memory of you, and there's really nothing you could do about it. It's incredibly frightening. Yes, exactly. One of the personal anecdotes Tracy uses in the book is how she was locked out of her own Facebook account, which does kind of give away her age a little bit, but she's still using the platform. But the point is she was unable to prove successfully to Facebook that she is who she actually is, because, a computer says no. And that, of course, brings up a whole issue of how we defend who we are on the internet, how you defend your intellectual property, how you even defend your own identity if a system is saying that that's not you. It reminds me, of course, cases of people in India who have been depersoned because some government computer says they're deceased, even though they're perfectly alive. The one man actually threw a parade to prove that he was alive. I don't know if it worked or not. But, these are the sorts of things that are taking place when the digital versus the real sort of are interacting in terms of a loop to determine what truth is. And you can be screaming, I am me, I am the truth. But if the systems are saying otherwise, you can get locked out of your bank accounts, you can get locked out of your, like that man in India, your access to social welfare entitlements, and all sorts of things. And I suppose the other issue that we have to mention if you're talking about Tracy's book, which is, again, popping onto the radar right now, is the idea of neuroprivacy, which was a very early speaker on, which sounded like science fiction just 2 years ago. But now, with our increasing advances in very literally brain-reading technology that can pull thoughts out of your head, as to who has the right to that. Do advertisers have the right to what's going on in your head with increasing applications of things like effective advertising? Do governments have access to that with increasing pushes towards predictive policing, which again, just a couple of years ago was a total science fiction conspiracy theory craziness, but is now something that's being debated by policymakers and being implemented on the streets of places like the UK.
Sure. Bronwyn Williams, thank you so much. Frightening, interesting. Frightening. Let me just use that word again. Bronwyn Williams is the trend translator and future finance specialist at Flux Trends. The book is The Future of You, Can Your Identity Survive 21st Century Technology? The author, I highly recommend it, is Tracy Follows. Really does just explain how quickly things are changing. Make sure the people around you know that you are you. Stay in the physical world, why don't you? Just gone 7:30 on The Money Show.
The Money Show, how I make my money.
Well, I have to tell you, it's a great pleasure tonight to welcome someone who's been able to make a living channeling our emotions for us, able to channel them to something quite rare. And I'm talking about the musician, the jazz musician from KwaZulu-Natal, Nduduzo Makhathini, someone who's made a career performing, creating music, creating it live, but also through studying it. In fact, he has a PhD on the subject. And let's just take 30 seconds to just hear a little bit about the kind of genius that I'm talking about.
Gonna get it like I am. Gonna get it like I am. Gonna get it. Siyakhuleka kuwena mkhubulwane. Esihlabathini esijulile zolwandle. Siyakhuleka kuwe mveli kuqala wena wadabuka ohlangene lapho sonke sivela khona.
The sounds there of Nduduzo Makhathini. Nduduzo, so good evening, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on how I make my money this Monday evening on The Money Show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
I know you're very, very far away from home, and I think when we hear that music, we kind of feel we're at home. It's quite a strange thing. Your love affair with music, I mean, it comes from your family, right? I mean, it comes from the people who came before you in your family.
Right, it does. Yeah, I mean, naturally being born in the so-called rural areas in South Africa during apartheid, there had to be there was a necessity or even an urgency for alternative modalities of being in the world, in a sense that there was so much catastrophe going on. And maybe in those moments, song presented a kind of break. So I come from not only a family that sang, but also a village, a people, but also, I think there was just music all around. And there was a certain attachment to music back then, of course, which was every ritual was kind of signified by certain repertoires, which would mean eventually that repertoires were speaking to ways of being in the world, but also calendar events and marking very important times. So I kind of came from those traditions and I tried to advocate for that both in my scholarly interventions, but also just as an artist that shares the stages all around the world. So that's really the background.
I noticed your website, which maybe is just for a sort of international audience, because they described you as a Zulu healer, which is not a word we would use in South Africa, I don't think. But I thought maybe it did contain an important word, because does music play a role for you in healing? I mean, healing of our soul, healing of our wounds.
Right. I guess there is some kind of truth in that, in a sense that I am initiated as a sangoma, so which will translate as a shaman or a healer in kind of global context. But also, I think it's just an intrinsic kind of ingredients or even a property in the sounds of South African or African music, where if we speak about a word such as ngoma, it's very telling of the idea of healing, that of song, that of prophetic knowledge, that of divination, and, all of these things kind of holding into a kind of wholeness. So whereas in the West, for instance, music is understood as a branch of aesthetic, in Africa, and without exoticizing, this is definitely a much more expanded notion of musicking, which has to do with healing practices and prophetic traditions. So it's definitely a thing that's is kind of a backdrop, perhaps even a framework for my work. It really enunciates with this vision for opening healing potency, at least for people to access their own healing powers.
I wonder sometimes when I was thinking of the concept today of music healing, if one of the reasons South Africa produces such amazing musicians and such kind of interesting sounds is because we're actually such a tough society.
Definitely. I guess there is something to be said about that. It's in a sense that even outside of Africa, Black aesthetic has always been a kind of fugitive aesthetic, in a sense that it has to do with the fact that the Black biography is something that we cannot transcend in making the music. In other words, the body and what the body has experienced through generational catastrophes and things that our forefathers and foremothers have experienced is not something that we're trying to escape when we make music today. So healing is really a preoccupation that haunts our sound, in a sense that our sounds cannot really focus on entertainment that much. So, because there's just so much that we need to speak to, that healing is no longer just like a buzzword or a thing that we speak about, but it's the actual praxis of music making, that we come to this sound seeking modalities of transcendence anyway, and healing being a kind of harmonizing these broken parts of ourselves, whether we think of ourselves through the Middle Passage or through transatlantic problems and slave trade, or whether we think about coloniality. There has always been this necessity to claim our dignity. So where in other parts dignity becomes a default thing, it's a bad right that particular people assumes certain kinds of protocols that are kind of accessed by being born. As a Black body, these things are not so obvious. And so there's an urgency for our sounds to speak to how do we activate our collective memory, and how do we bring these broken parts of our biography together, and so that one day we'll tell our grandkids a more coherent story of who we are. So healing here understood at a much deeper level of collective memory.
I'm listening to you speak, and I'm battling to imagine you as a child in a school wearing the kind of, I think, still a sort of colonial uniform, and I'm trying to imagine you understanding as the world as you express it to us now, and imagining you also going through what children in our institutions go through, which is the sort of the wearing of the uniform,
Right.
the maths. I mean,
Right.
I imagine you probably had to learn Afrikaans, for example. I know it was KwaZulu-Natal.
I did. I'm part of that generation.
Yeah, and I can't imagine what that was like for you, who has the soul that you do. There, let me put it like that.
Right. Man, of course, what you're painting is definitely a backdrop for any child born in the early 80s. Afrikaans as a second language, English as the first language, at home, the mother tongue completely excluded from curriculum. And even more, Afrikaans, at the backdrop of 1976, where the previous generations had to think about mathematics, physics, biology inside of a foreign language. So there's, of course, these problems that we inherit as people that come after. I think that's partly why maybe scholarship became a thing for me. I remember when I went to study music, and part of what I thought was really a kind of rich repertoire of songs, and songs having to do with cosmological happenings, was in the university seen as being musical illiterate. So in other words, it was rendered outside of the center, the hegemony. It was peripheral. So as a result, I had to do what they call the foundation year, or a bridging course for people that had no musical background. So you can see already from that moment that the kinds of violence that come with curriculum, and curriculum that ignores other types of knowing in the world. So I think, of course, by extension, this is why I would later consider doing my PhD. And being in the university since 2006, I've always been there, not for the university actually, but that there is a necessity to protest such a system. And we've been doing that by way of presence and being there in the university, and kind of pushing what we might think of as a pluriversity, which is maybe a future concept for thinking about a university that listens. So, for instance, you find a university just at the back of Umkhumbane in Durban, but that has no connection to the epistemologies of the people in Umkhumbane. So a pluriversity as an intervention will be maybe a future university or a future pluriversity that will understand that there are multiple ways of thinking about truth, and get away from this singularity of truth and this notion of the universal as a Eurocentric paradigm, by extension informing curriculum. So part of why we are in the university is because of all of those sufferings, and feeling that there is nothing said about my people in curriculum or even in the history. And our history, of course, in South Africa, in those years, we're studying from the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck in the Cape, 1652. So that's already problematic, because it suggests that our history starts from when it gets hijacked. So these are some of the things that are, not explicitly musical, but that the music is trying to speak to, actually.
We are speaking to Nduduzo Makhathini this evening, the pianist and composer and academic. So many more questions to come, Nduduzo, especially about your thesis. It's 8 minutes to 8.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ADvTECH CIB, proud sponsor of the SARA Rail Conference 2025, powering progress, connecting economies.
We're speaking tonight to Nduduzo Makhathini, the pianist and composer and academic. Nduduzo, you're a PhD. The title is Breaking into Sound, Dislocating into Cosmology and Improvisation in South African Jazz. And I just wondered if I could ask, maybe if we remove some of the academic language, what you were actually examining.
Right. Well, in the simplest way, the argument is that there isn't a way of reaching sound without consulting the very worldview or cosmology, as it were, in which the person kind of emerges. So in the end, my argument was that the current readings of music or current readings of jazz in particular have always kind of ignored a much broader paradigm of thought that is the Bantu people, the Nguni people, as a kind of place of departure for thinking about sound as a result of being in the world. So essentially, here I kind of bring forward this idea that when I was growing up, we did not call it music making, but we called it breaking into sound. And if we call it breaking into sound, there is a thinking about the break. A break is something that releases. So in other words, sound is as in this way understood as a manifestation of something that's already there. So you're breaking into something that's already there. So that's like kind of a very kind of summarized way of it, and trying to think, like you say, outside of academic density of theory and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up listening to rock music, and so that if I hear Elvis, that lands in a particular way, and maybe you're describing that with different words.
Precisely.
Yeah. I want to ask, when you perform, you the way in which you think and speak in English about music is one thing. When you perform your music and music, you're using different terms, right? Like it's a different thing. It's not the kind of formal way in which you're describing it now. You're feeling it differently.
Right. Well, precisely. I think it's, the world doesn't know enough about how critical African languages are already. So in a sense, I think it's very critical, just not in the register that has hegemonized what critical thought is. So, for instance, if we listen to Babupuza Kemisi or Mambusi Mshongo, who would be understood as like kind of Maskanda urban artists, there's so much critical thoughts that's happening there. It's just happening in isiZulu. And it's for me, it's kind of strange how we don't associate indigenousness and intellectualism. It's a thing that I'm grappling with every day, but I am trying to say that even without the English language, these things are still critical. They produce a way for inquiry, and me kind of protesting the singing in English is one of those ways to say that when these things are explained in English, they are misrepresented and they are kind of reduced, actually. And there's a lot of violence of translation. So these are some of the things. So playing that music and singing in that language already as a modality for protest.
We've got literally 20 seconds. It must be different when you're performing your music overseas in front of audiences that aren't South African?
It is definitely different. I've been thinking more and more about how the music itself is a relational philopraxis. What it means is that the music looks into cosmological primordial systems, which means they go beyond race, for instance. These are things that humanity should remember. What I've been thinking about more and more is that the end of the world won't be destruction of buildings and all of that, but the end of the world will be when humanity stops sensing. And we're seeing that a lot more. And I mean, to that point, I've just put out like a tiny desk concert that really speaks about these things. So if people want to hear more of these, I have a reflection on that tiny desk concert. People can go and watch that.
Nduduzo Makhathini, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful time with you this evening.